Proud supporters of Africa this week. Engine, with us, you are number one.
Ongoing political instability in Arab Africa is having wider impact on global economics and business. Business will now need to be looking for roadmaps to navigate unpredictable and risky landscapes across Africa. Daniel Kenner, Senior Executive Associate, Africa Strategy Group, discussed ways to see through the smoke.
The situation is very fluid at the moment. I think most governments, I think the huddling of 40 nations in London are excluding the Libyan sort of revolutionaries, demonstrates that everyone is trying to find a quick end to the military intervention sanctioned by the UN Security Council 1973. I think the other problem is that no one is really au fait with who are the rebels. What is their motivation besides Gaddafi? And I think these issues will continue to influence the momentum behind movements, initiatives taken overnight. President Obama was quite explicit last night, trying to reassure the American people on America's position. And between that report and me walking in here, we hear that the United States has appointed an emissary to facilitate conversation.
Let's talk about America's intervention in Libya, because we know that there's this whole no-fly zone and how it's being monitored. The inaugural mission by AFRICOM, what's that all about from the US perspective? Yeah,
I think that we must understand that the mandate of the no-fly zone came from the UN Security Council, initiated by the Arab League. The United States and other countries who subscribed to that initiative decided to form this coalition and begin to restrict the Gaddafi regime's move towards the east, towards Benghazi. AFRICOM, which was founded a few years ago, based in Liberia, is part of the architecture of the United States on military presence in strategic geographical territories or zones, and they have engaged. The irony of the situation is that around AFRICOM, it was the Maghreb Arabic nations which were more optimistic and supporting the establishment, and less so the sub-Saharan African states.
I mean, obviously, prior to the crisis in the Middle East and North Africa, America's been preoccupied with its own national security issues and anti-terror expeditions, for lack of a better word, across the globe. Is that still a priority for America as it deals with Africa, or is containing the crisis in North Africa foremost of mind?
Yeah, I think this is an indictment on the whole process of diplomacy. I think when we resort to the Security Council, and during 2011, for example, the Security Council has issued 8 resolutions, of which 6 dealt with Africa. And when you resort to the Security Council, that is almost of last resort when diplomacy has failed. And I think that there are very few countries around the world that want to find themselves drawn into a protracted military intervention in any part of the world. And I think what is happening now in London is a demonstration that, you know, let's broaden this coalition and let's find a solution as soon as possible, because we don't know what we've got ourselves into.
China has launched its next 5-year plan. The plan includes a proposed shift away from reliance on cheap exports towards a greater domestic consumption. We spoke to Kuseni Dlamini, CEO of Old Mutual South Africa and Emerging Markets, about the plan's implications for global economics and emerging markets.
We're seeing a shift in China. China, as we know, has recently overtaken Japan to be the second largest economy in the world. Yeah. China is now starting to act like a superpower, like an economic superpower to be more specific. The shift towards domestic consumption is more in line with how the developed first world countries operate. If you look at Germany, it has been the largest exporter until recently, until China overtook Germany. And by and large, Germany has also managed to produce high value added goods, and China is trying to do that. But more importantly, China is also looking to prop up domestic consumption because they do not want to continue to rely on cheap imports, and it has got lots of problems because internationally it causes a lot of resistance against Chinese brands and Chinese goods, and China is trying to be sensitive to all that.
Let's talk about the first thing that they have to do, and that's try to prop up the middle class, which currently stands at about 157 million people, so just over 10% of the population constitute the middle class in China. So despite higher growth rates, people are not earning what they should be doing. The wages are just a tenth of what they are in Japan. How are they going to address that?
On the wages front, we've seen a shift, Lerato. The wages have started to increase in China as well. We're starting to see even some of the cheap manufacturing activities moving out of China into countries such as Vietnam and other cheap labor locations. But on the wages front, there is more that is happening in China, and we're seeing a shift there. It's not fair to compare wages in China and Japan, because we'd rather compare China with other emerging markets, such as India, Brazil, and maybe South Africa. We've seen the wages also going up a bit, and to your point about the rising middle class, that also creates a consuming class, and that also unlocks more opportunities for industries such as my industry, the financial services. Interestingly, one of the key focus areas in the 5-year plan, which has got 12 points, 12 areas of focus, is improving and developing China's financial services industry.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because the focus now is going to be on providing products for insurance, retail banking, and also savings plans. I thought that the Asians in general were very good at putting away money for the future.
China is not like Japan. The Japanese are very good in saving. China does not have a strong and entrenched savings culture as Japan does, and there's still lots of opportunities, therefore, for companies such as mine to be able to tap into the rising middle class, the increasing focus and orientation towards savings that we're seeing amongst the middle classes, the shift of people from rural areas to urban areas becoming part of the ranks of the working class and the middle classes. There is a lot of opportunity there. There is a need for a culture of savings to be inculcated in China, and we're seeing much more emphasis by the state to try and encourage people to have access to banking services, have access to insurance services, and that's where the opportunity is as far as we are concerned.
Greenpeace International urged the South African government to desist from further development of nuclear technology. Dr. Kumi Naidu, Executive Director of Greenpeace International, was on Beyond Markets.
Well, there's a little bit of a disconnect about the role of South Africa internationally in this and what we do domestically. I think it's important to acknowledge in the international climate negotiations, South Africa is very much on the right side of history. They are pushing the progressive positions, and Greenpeace fully supports that. However, when we look at what the domestic thinking is and the domestic plans are at the national level, overall we think we've got it wrong. We think that nuclear as a way, firstly, to go is too expensive, too dangerous, and will deliver too little, too late in terms of actually helping us to bring down our emissions. On coal, we recognize that we can't shift over coal, within the next year, but we need a much more aggressive coal phase-out plan. Now, what we would say is that South Africa has huge potential in turning this crisis into an opportunity, because we have huge potential in terms of solar, in terms of wind, in terms of geothermal, biomass, and so on. And actually investing the kind of money that we are talking about investing in nuclear, for example, can actually not only address climate change, but also generate millions of decent jobs in a new green economy.
So effectively a mixed review for South Africa there. The RP2 makes provision for about 9,600 megawatts from the nuclear space. That's what can be offered. We're talking about the country proposing to build 6 new nuclear stations. You're not supporting that, but the state sees it as a viable, cleaner and safe option.
Well, because it does not contribute carbon into the atmosphere, does not make it cleaner. Try telling that to the Japanese people now that nuclear is cleaner. Try telling it to the people even in the United States and surrounding countries who are already seeing the impact of that radiation. So what we would say is that developing countries have a right to develop, no question about it. There should be a greater burden on rich countries who have been a bigger part of this problem and over 200 years have been actually engaged in creating this problem. But we now need to recognize that Africa, for example, as a continent, is in the front line of climate vulnerability and climate impacts, that in fact we should be doing everything to bring down emissions on the one hand, but also capitalizing on this moment to generate a new green economy. Because if you take China, for example, in the first quarter of last year, China became the biggest investor globally in terms of renewable technologies. And the more we delay, the more we get behind the curve of what a new green economy will look like.
What do you make of the people who advance the argument, and these are divergent views in Africa, that with growth being on average 5, 6, 7% in Africa, the continent is now emerging as entering the industrial phase of our socio-economic development, and we should be allowed to pollute the air in a way in which Europe and the United States, even China, were allowed to do in order to get to the kind of development and growth that we're seeing in these economies. That to start to impose all sorts of limitations on Africa is to impede the broader economic growth aspects. Other countries should subscribe, but Africa should be given some concessions.
Well, at one level, within the climate negotiations, Greenpeace and many of the governments of the world actually support the idea of common but differentiated responsibilities.